Hey, welcome back to The Current. This is Pastor Chris Nafis, and today we are talking AI, artificial intelligence. With me is my friend Derek Kubilus, who is the pastor at Ashland First United Methodist Church in Ohio. He's the author of a book called Holy Hell, A Case Against Eternal Damnation. But today we are focusing on artificial intelligence, what is coming, and more importantly, as disciples of Jesus, how do we prepare ourselves for this new era of life in our society, and how do we work out our ethics and our practices around artificial intelligence? This was a fun and fascinating conversation. I hope that you will find it edifying and helpful as we're all thinking about it. Here it is. Enjoy. All right. Well, hey, Derek, it's great to see you. We were just talking off the screen. It's been like 15 years since we've had like a real conversation. And I'm so grateful that you're willing to just spend some time. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This should be fun.
I think it will be fun. Yeah. I mean, I saw your Facebook post. This is how I ended up contacting you. You posted a New York Times article about, it was like a ChatGPT or an OpenAI former employee that was kind of having all these doomsday predictions and stuff. And I was like, man, I have been thinking a lot about this. And you're someone who at Duke I just knew as like this really kind of opinionated in some ways, but really sharp, intelligent person. Yeah. But like thoughtful, like there's not that many people who have strong opinions that I've seen like change their opinions as they've like kind of had conversations and stuff. And I've seen kind of you go through some of that. And so I just have a lot of respect for you and how you think through things.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So I was like, yeah, I should talk to Derek about AI. This would be great. We could have a really fun conversation. How did you start thinking about AI, or like, how did you come to focusing on that?
Well, I've been aware of it just through like the cultural hype and stuff. I probably didn't interact with it until way late, but it was actually my wife that got me thinking really deeply about it. Because she is an executive assistant. So she's like the assistant for a CEO at a big nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And she's constantly taking classes and reading books and things to kind of take her skills to the next level. And one of those classes was on using AI. And I was like, wait a second. Like, you're telling me you took like a super practical, essentially continuing ed course on using this thing? Like, it is in that this was like a couple years ago. And maybe a year ago. And I was like, whoa, this is way more integrated into life already than I would have thought, right? Like, we've all seen people make the funny pictures and stuff like that. And so we've had several conversations, and that has led me down a bit of a rabbit trail, just trying to get my head around it.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, trying in vain, I might add, to understand the technology itself, which is so complicated. I think I'm not wrong to say that the people who design the technology don't absolutely know how it works.
That's what I'm reading, that they don't really know how this thing is happening. They've kind of lost the tracking of it.
Well, it's kind of designed to do that. So like they call it a black box. Like, you set it up and just let it go. And it grows in ways that are almost impossible to chart. But even more than how it works, I'm interested in how we respond to it.
Right.
And I have friends who are all over the gamut, especially in ministry. So I'm a United Methodist clergy person. And I have one friend who is all aboard the AI train. he is unabashed that he uses it to write sermons and develop Bible studies and all of these things. He's constantly posting pictures and graphics and videos that he's creating for his church using AI. And I have some friends that will not touch it for their own sort of ethical reasons,
Mhm.
do not believe that it should exist. And people who, like, when they see their friends posting AI things on social media, will actually like confront them in all capital letters that they should stop doing that.
Yeah.
So there's this huge wide spectrum right now in people's feelings about AI.
Have you used it much yourself?
I think you could characterize it as I've dipped my toe in the water. I refuse to use it in sermon writing or in book writing. Like those are the places that I just don't want those things to be tainted right now.
Yep.
Where I have used it, and I actually got this from, I feel like I'm like sharing a deep, dark secret right now. But that's part of it too, because it almost feels a little dishonest.
Right.
There have been a couple times when I have had to write an email over an issue that could potentially have a lot of conflict surrounding it.
Mhm.
And as you may recall from our days at Duke Divinity School, I don't always have that much tact with my words. And so I have essentially written out in email like everything I want to say, and then told ChatGPT to, hey, make this sound warm and professional and inoffensive, but get all these points home. And it has done an okay job. I mean, nothing that I could copy and paste necessarily like whole cloth, but definitely change some things in light of what it said. But I also feel kind of dirty about that.
Yeah.
How about you?
Me, yeah. So the first time I really tried it was I was trying to make a lineup for my son's soccer team that I was coaching, and I was just like it was complicated because I wanted everybody to play 3/4 of the game, wanted them all to only play two positions, and I was just like I was like this is like a math problem. I wonder if Gemini, which was Google's one at the time, could do this, and I put it in. This was last fall, and it was incapable of doing it. It kept spitting out so I had 4/4 and all that, and it kept having the same players play the same positions for 3/4, and then it would mix them up for the fourth quarter, and it wasn't. And then I would tell it like, no, this is incorrect. You're not doing what I'm asking you to do. And then it would say, oh, I'm sorry, I messed
Yeah.
up, and then it would give me another version of the same thing. So that was my first time using it myself. I was very unimpressed because it couldn't do this simple math thing. And then, learning that's really not, these are language models. So it's really not the strength of what it does. I have been using it, and I also feel like this is like a deep, dark secret or something, but I've
Mhm.
been using it in this podcast actually to make a transcript of the podcast, which is helpful to have for people that are hard of hearing. And it's very
Mm.
labor intensive to do that, but it does it super fast
Mhm.
and easy. There's like a tool in our hosting site that does it. And then it writes like a little synopsis that I've used to kind of have the synopsis, which again, I'm the same as you, like for like a book or a sermon or anything that I feel like was the content itself. I'm like hard no, don't want anything to do with it. But since it's like a summary of something that I've already done, it feels a little bit more, and since it's like grunt work type work,
Yeah.
it's a little more like, all right, this is where it's actually useful. And it has saved me a lot of time. So I don't know if everyone's going to tune out of this podcast now that they know that their
It's all fake.
synopsis is, yeah. Actually, I have cloned myself and we're talking. I'm just kidding. But other than that, I really haven't used it at all. I
Mhm.
haven't really done emails and stuff, but I'm sure that I've interacted with it, which is part of, a fair amount, which is part of, what we're working through is like, all right, this thing is coming, whether we are intentionally engaging with it or not. it's like we're getting spam calls from it. We're seeing it on our.
Oh yeah. I've read a couple books and a lot of like online stuff. I've read in several different places all the telltale signs of AI generated text. And I feel like I'm getting pretty good at spotting it like in the wild.
Mhm.
And I'm seeing it every day. I see it every day. I see the pictures, which I think are really easy to spot, although I'm told baby boomers might struggle with it. I see those every day on social media. Absolutely every day. The app, if you're at all interested in like Pinterest, I have a few things that I sometimes like to follow on Pinterest. That app is quickly becoming just unusable because it is so full of just AI slop. I mean,
Yeah.
just every post becomes AI really quick in some categories. So,
Yeah, I had some friends who told me there was like a John Oliver episode just on that specifically on his show. So I watched it before just to
mm,
have this conversation, and he has a whole episode on that, and specifically points to Pinterest as like, this woman's complaining on the show.
yeah.
They're showing a video of her saying, "I just searched up garden, and like almost every picture is not of a real garden. It's all
Mm,
AI, and you can tell because this, and this." And I think right
yeah.
now I mostly feel like I can tell, but I think it is getting better, and it will be harder to tell.
The videos that are coming out now
Yeah,
are crazy.
yeah.
They have a kind of softness to them
Hmm.
that sometimes can key me in, but the New York Times just had like a little quiz, 5 videos, or maybe it was 10 videos, and I got exactly 5 right and 5 wrong, which means like I wasn't picking up anything
Mm-hmm.
essentially. So, yeah, I mean, it's in to think about where we came from 3 years ago and what it was capable of. If you go out in 3 more years, or the big essay that got everyone talking was called AI 2027, which was a big thought experiment of where AI could take us through 2027 with lots of very serious doomsday scenarios and stuff like that. It was very sensational. It's just the possibilities are wide open. And I
Hmm.
think that's what makes a lot of people nervous right now.
Yeah, that's what makes me nervous because it just feels like it feels like we're on the cusp of like a major revolution in how we discern what's true and what's not, which is kind of what we're getting at with the videos and the pictures, which we've already kind of been there already with
Yeah,
like fake news and
absolutely.
stuff. But now it feel like I had the first moment this week. I was on Twitter and there was a picture someone had shared of like an apartment complex in Ukraine that had been bombed by Russia, and it was the first time where I was really like I feel like I've thought about this, but it was the first time where I was like looking at a thing and I was like, I don't know if this is real. I don't know,
Yeah.
and I can't tell, and I think that that's going to be pretty normal now. There's been pretty mainstream news stories where like the broadcast network was either fooled or didn't care enough to check, and they've shared videos or photos that were AI stuff. Or Rachel, my wife, told me about I forget what newspaper it was, but they published a whole summer book reading list about books that you should read this summer, and the entire list was AI generated. None of the books were real.
I heard about
They
that. I
published
heard
it.
about that. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
so there's that side of it, and then like I don't know, it just feels like there's going to be a lot of money and power because it's going to change how we work. I mean, it feels like we're kind of heading towards like an industrial revolution sort of a situation where everything just sort of changes very quickly, and we're kind of all figuring out how do we live now in this new world that has not only the internet but has artificial intelligence running around.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really great book called The Gutenberg Parenthesis
Mhm.
that I think puts all of this in context really well. And if you haven't checked that out, I mean, I think it's a good book on its own, but it has a lot to say about specifically the revolutions that happen in the wake of new communication devices
Hmm.
and new forms of communication and sort of what that does to society. If you break it down, the main theses of that book, it has to do with what happened with the Gutenberg printing press. And it really means to say that a lot of the instability we saw in the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance came from this technology that people had to disperse information more quickly and more widely than they ever had before.
Hmm.
And so not only do you have the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, obviously, you have like the peasant revolt in Germany, you have the wars of religion in England and France, you have the English Civil War. And I think there's a case to be made that in all these instances, you can link them in some way to the advent of the printing press. They had these things that they would call pamphlet wars, where people in communities would start constantly handing out pamphlets on different sides of the issue. And then those pamphlet wars would turn into eventually real wars. And coincidentally, you also see around this time conspiracy theories start to pop up. With the advent of new forms of communication, you always get the spreading of these conspiracy theories, which are almost like a virus that sort of gets attached to the way we communicate. So this is where you see a lot of the anti-Semitism. You see the protocols of the elders of Zion, the shadowy cabals of secret people. That's where a lot of it has its start. And then when radio is invented, you see something very different, but similar. Radio causes another kind of revolution, but it's much more centralized because radio happens on bandwidths that can be easily controlled. You
Hmm.
see revolutions in nations. So this is not instability between people and tribes and towns and villages. This is instability that's created between nations themselves. So that's when you have the rise of radical nationalism, fascism, communism. Those are made possible by the airwaves. And that's what we really have until television kind of starts to work out the kinks of that. And then you wind up with Walter Cronkite and Woodward and Bernstein and an age of ethics in journalism where it's this really big deal to get your facts straight and everything is so well organized. And then the internet comes along and social media and blows that all up again
Yeah.
with this very egalitarian kind of communication style. And so you get the internal pressure and you get, as we've seen, the conspiracy theories. I would say ultimately you get, QAnon and COVID conspiracies, and those kind of things. And then people start taking the moral implication of the technology more seriously.
Yeah. Well, and part of it feels like the internet revolution is still kind of in progress. Like it hasn't
Yes.
feels like it's been a long time for us. I don't know how old you are, Derek. I'm guessing you're about my age, but I'm
Yeah,
an elder
42.
millennial,
Yeah.
41, yeah. And so we kind of grew up and had the time before the internet, and like the internet, Facebook came out when I was in college, and so we've kind of seen it. And it feels like it's been forever in some ways, but it really, in terms of generations and in terms of history, we're really still, the internet's pretty new. And then now we're adding a whole nother layer of, because like AI isn't a thing without the internet, I don't think, right? Like it doesn't,
Yeah, sure.
but we're adding like another layer to it. We're not only And on the internet, it's a mixed thing with social media and stuff too. Because on the one hand, like you said, it's very egalitarian. Everyone can say what they and be heard and build a platform and a voice for themselves. You don't have to go through an editor or a newsroom or journalism school. But then at the same time, that unfilters everything, which just opens things up to lots of wild stuff. And now AI feels like it's this huge generator, will be a huge generator of like fake things, I guess. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what, because like it's not going to be communicating true things in the sense of like facts and things, like, we can talk about what truth is, I guess, but it's going to be almost exclusively used probably to have conversations with, not real people. I don't know.
Well,
Do you see it being different or what do you see
I
it?
mean, yeah. Number one, what's really good right now, I think, and why conversations like this are good, is because we have a little bit of an interregnum. Before AI completely saturates our lives, we have this moment where we actually know that it is coming,
Hmm.
which is something that I don't think we really had with social media in particular,
Hmm.
right? Like we were just kind of like, oh, this is a new thing. Oh, this is a new thing. And before we knew it, we were all using it like crazy, right? Like I remember being in seminary, like having to force myself not to check Facebook when we were studying for exams because everyone would post, their page count of how many pages they had
Oh
yet to
yeah.
write and stuff like that. And it was just on us before we knew what we were doing. And it took like the crisis of, I think I don't want to offend any of your listeners. The twin crisis of like a Trump presidency and a pandemic to open up all of our lives, open up all of our eyes to say, whoa, there is some really nasty stuff
Hmm.
that this can be used for.
Right.
And just now, I feel like we're starting to catch up with it. We're starting to intentionally teach children how to use social media appropriately, how to spot fake news and things like that. Hopefully, we can get a jump start on AI. Hopefully, we can start having these conversations and have a little bit better footing because we see the wave coming, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Totally. And that's part of why I wanted to talk to you is because I think like that's what, we could go on and I feel like I've done this with friends and we even with congregants at times and just kind of gone down doomsday lists of like what happens next with AI, what happens politically, what happens to the workforce, what happens to creative work, what happens to, all of these things. And, we don't really know. We can conjecture and guess, and it seems like whatever's going to happen is going to be big. But the real question for me that I'm interested in is like, how do we respond to it? How do we prepare for what's coming? How do we kind of get like sharpen our tools for discernment on like as we figure out the new ethics and morals of like a new technology? What do we need to prepare for as churches or as followers of Jesus in order to be able to do that work well, to look out for people? So for example, I think AI is already beginning to whittle away at some like white collar jobs, which
Oh, yeah.
technology's been whittling away at blue collar and low
Mhm.
wage jobs forever. But like I think the whole job market is going to change pretty rapidly. So how do we prepare for that? Like, what does it mean to think about we get so much of our sense of identity and value from the work that we do? Well, what happens when a lot of people suddenly their work is kind of taken from them? How do we re-understand what it means to be human and how to come alongside? Those are the kinds of things that I'm looking to figure out.
Sure.
That's like a million questions all in one, I
Yeah.
guess. But what do you see as like the main tools that we need to like think about as we enter into this new season in the church of like how do we work through these things in terms of like ethics and practice?
Mm. Well, I'm a United Methodist, so as a fellow Wesleyan, I'm not sure if you guys use this term or not, we're really into something we call holy conferencing.
Mhm.
Is that a Nazarene term? Is
I
that
haven't heard any
something?
Nazarenes use that
Oh,
term. I've
okay.
heard it around,
Okay.
went to Methodist school together, but I
Sure.
haven't. But yeah, tell us what it is.
But it's just all about the power and the grace that's found in conversations, for lack of a better word.
Hmm.
And we Methodists talk about it a lot. The problem is that we can be really bad at it. A good example of how we're bad at it is around the LGBTQ debate in our church. Like we just had a major split and everything. And through that whole process, we talked about holy conferencing a lot, but I don't think we ever did it.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
totally.
What we did is we shouted our talking points at one another.
Hmm.
But what we didn't do was just sit in a posture of listening to one another's stories.
Yep.
So, like, I know in United Methodism, in my own denomination, what I would like is for us to call a whole conference just to talk.
Mm,
Not with the goal of making hard and fast rules at the end of it. Sometimes people think, oh, if you're going to have a meeting, you got to have something, a piece of paper that, the meeting produces, a statement or something. I don't even think we need that. I just want to hear from people and have discussions. And I think we could like invite some academics to present papers, and we could invite some people just to tell their stories. Where have you used AI? What have you found? What has been good? What has been bad? Is there someone who has lost their job because of AI? Is there someone who has a career in AI? What do the environmental sciences have to tell us about it? What's their story? And I it's tough though because I can already feel that polarization happening around this issue.
mm, mhm.
Like I said, I have some friends who are all about it and some friends who are dead set against it. And so those sides are already forming up. But what I'm interested in is kind of this fuzzy middle. And I'm interested in getting a lot of people together who have the humility to say, we don't know. We don't know how this will affect us. We don't know what the environmental impacts are going to be, the social and economic impacts, but we want to try to figure out how we can respond carefully and faithfully to it. So, I mean, I don't have a great answer for you other than I hope churches and denominations have intentional conversations about how to move forward. And it was interesting. My own denomination, the United Methodist Church Board of Discipleship, just released like a thing into social media, like just into the ether, as I was preparing for this conversation. They just very flippantly talked about AI and why you should use it, why it's a tool, and so on and so forth. And they just said, well, and we'll be sensitive to the environmental things and so on and so forth, and misinformation and all of that. But they said, go ahead and use it, essentially. And he was like, well, I don't know. I'm not
Mhm.
there yet.
Yeah.
I need to have more conversations with people and figure out, I know someone on social media who makes their living as an illustrator who says, look, like I'm staring down the barrel of losing my job.
Hmm.
Like I went to art school and AI has just learned from everything that I've ever made and dumped on the internet and can do what I do very easily. I think we need to hear those kinds of stories, you know?
Yeah, for sure. and to talk about success stories too, maybe of how like
Yeah.
I've distinguished myself from this AI juggernaut and how, you know what I mean? I don't know that these stories even exist yet, but like so my wife runs a small business. She's a flower farmer and has built this whole business around Instagram and stuff. But
Oh.
she could tell stories about how she's built up a sense of connection and authenticity with like locally grown flowers in the face of
Mm,
mass market flowers that are mostly shipped from South America or Asia to Southern California, which is just a long way. It's environmentally unhelpful, all those kinds of things. But there is space to kind of carve out something better if you can figure out how to like tell the story well and how to connect. I don't
yeah.
know if that's there for illustrators. I know my brother who edits this podcast for me is feeling the squeeze with video editing
Sure.
world and photography world. Um, so yeah, like it would probably be helpful for people to even people in those fields to just have like a open forum to talk to each other about like, all right, well, how do we I don't know, fight this thing is maybe not even the right word, but how do we distinguish, real art from generated art? And how do we kind of tell that story to the rest of the world so that people can support human artists or whatever the case might be?
And I know that was part of what the big Hollywood writers strike was about a couple of
Yep.
years ago,
Yep.
was they saw the writing on the wall that like, so to speak, that like we're going to be out of a job if we don't do something to try to protect ourselves. Now, that wasn't so much a conversation as it was just sort of sticking up for themselves. But it just goes to show, some people have lost their jobs already,
Well, yeah, for sure.
and some people are staring down the tunnel at it. I mean, I have seen advertisements on television that I know were made with AI. I mean, I can just see it.
Hmm.
I read copy all the time online that is obviously AI generated. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets difficult. Okay. When we ask that question about jobs in AI, we should be aware that there is a deeper question that lies behind it, which is how do you feel not just about like AI taking people's jobs? How do you feel about capitalism,
Yeah, it's
right?
right behind it, like you said.
If you're uncomfortable with a new, more efficient technology putting people out of work, whether you're talking about the car displacing the horse and buggy, or solar power displacing coal workers, or AI displacing coders and illustrators and filmmakers, then your problem is with capitalism,
Hmm.
which is totally appropriate. My problem is with capitalism, Um, other than war, I think it's probably the most evil thing that's ever been invented. So I think we should be asking those questions. But what we need to keep in mind is that CEOs and shareholders are not going to be asking those kinds of questions.
Right.
They want efficiency. They want higher profit margins. They want fewer HR things to deal with. So, with their support, you're not going to get rid of it because there are too many stakeholders in the profit possibilities. You're not going to get them to limit it when it could potentially make so much more money. So,
And maybe, I mean, oh, go ahead, finish your thought.
no, please,
Well,
please.
so this reminds me. So I had this conversation with this guy. He was kind of a stranger at this camp where I was at, and I was just asking him what do you do for a living? This was several years ago, and he works in agricultural engineering was his work, and he told me this story, and you could tell he's kind of like still processing the thing that he does for a living, but he
Mm,
goes to these agricultural processing factories and installs machines that displace all these workers. So they'll say like, I'll go
Mhm.
to this like factory in, in wherever Central Valley, California, where there's like 20 women whose whole job is just to slap these stickers on peaches or avocados or whatever it is that they're growing. And they're working all day just like slapping sticker after sticker after sticker. And he'll install a machine, and all of a sudden the machine can do the work of all 20 of them. And there's no, and then they're like, I mean, their job is miserable. They get paid crap for it. But
It's the
now
only thing they have.
that's the only thing they have. And now they're out of work. And what it kind
Mhm.
of like, I don't, it kind of hit me in a new way that like someone is benefiting from that increased efficiency, but it's not ever going to be the workers or the lower class. It's always going to be the ones who own the capital and who own the technology. So, like, he and his company that's installing these things are going to make a lot of money on these, agricultural machines. This is a very rudimentary thing, but it's still happening. They're going to make a lot of money on installing all these things all over the place. And then the person, whoever owns that farm or whoever owns that production line, they are gonna benefit from the efficiency, when it would
Mhm.
be nice if like we could all benefit from the efficiency. Like it would be nice if no one had to
Yeah.
slap stickers on oranges or whatever, but we could all live a little easier and work a few less hours because there's less work to do because we can do it more efficiently. But that's not how it works in our current system of capitalism. And like people will say, capitalism has made things much more efficient. It's brought a lot of thriving and wealth to the world and all these kinds of things. The problem is when it's unchecked or unregulated, and when it's just kind of in this free market way, then like the wealth always funnels its way up, especially when there's a new technology that makes things more efficient. Everyone on the bottom end ends up suffering. And the only real check is that now those people who are slapping stickers on the oranges, they're not going to be able to afford to buy as many oranges, which might affect the bottom line if it happens on a mass scale. But like generally speaking, the people who are making the money off it don't really care. They're just happy to have a. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. And I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but what you're talking about is who owns the means of production,
Yes.
right?
Yes, exactly.
um, so yeah, and it strikes me, one of the most depressing things I ever read was about this huge bill that was debated on in Congress in, I think, the 1960s, that was all about going to a 4-day work week with the federal government. And it was assumed that private industry would follow the government's lead, as it does with like holidays and things like that. And the argument was that, we have much more efficient means of producing things that requires less labor. And so we should be inviting people to have more leisure time. Like we have washing machines now. We have rudimentary computers that are supposed to help us by sort of taking the time we would spend on those things and allowing us to direct it elsewhere. And it turns out the answer is no, you keep working just as hard as you always have, if not harder, and you just always produce more,
Mhm.
right? And so if you were designing a society with this advanced technology for yourself, you might say, well, if I could have robots, sorry, this got very sci-fi very quickly.
Let's go. Let's do it.
If I could have robots that do everything for me, then I would be free to do what I wanted. And we should just do that for everyone. We make robots that can fix other robots, and then it would be great. Except that when it plays itself out in a capitalist world, only some people will get the benefit of the robots.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing. It's not like those farmers are saying to that woman, oh, great news. We have this machine that puts the stickers on the fruit. So we can just pay you and you can go chase your dreams because we
Right.
got a machine that does it automatically, right?
Exactly.
Like that's what we would want. But we live in a world where people don't yet know how to share. there's a really good book, and I can't remember the author of it. Please forgive me. It's very Googleable. It's called Habits of the High Tech Heart. And I think it was written in the early 2000s as a response to the internet. There was another sort of classical virtue ethics book called Habits of the Heart that was written many years before. And this tried to apply the lessons of that book to what was then known as the internet age, right? Which seemed so naive back then. But the idea being that the classical ethics of, if you want to talk about the fruit of the spirit, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self control, those things, like the task in every technological age, is to apply those things to the technology that you're using.
Mhm.
And that's the big question. How do we use AI in a generous manner?
Right.
Right? How do we use AI in a kindly manner? How do we use it gently? How do we use it in such a way that it allows us to be better stewards of our creation, of the creation that's been handed to us, and not just absolutely destroy it, which is what we're on the cusp of doing. The amount of power that these servers that generate this AI require are just incredible. I mean, I think it's Google is building a nuclear power plant just to serve its AI.
Microsoft too. I think
Oh, maybe
they're
it was Microsoft.
they've been talking about there's a nuclear power plant here near us that's been decommissioned, and I think they're working on bringing that back online. I think some of the motivation's got to be some of the AI stuff, but it's going to need an incredible amount of power if we're going to
Yeah.
like scale this thing as it seems like they're going to. Might be one of the few limiting factors actually that checks the technology a
Yeah.
bit, but
Yeah.
in the meantime, like I've heard stories of people who live near some of these servers that like are in and out of power themselves in their own homes because
Really?
and I
Wow.
get, maybe that's all AI generated nonsense. I don't know, but I just think there's going to be a cost to it environmentally, just with the how do we produce that power cleanly, and then in terms of sharing it, and there's all the wealth and everything gets mixed up with those questions also.
Yeah. So when I was using it for the sake of writing those emails, what I was thinking to myself is, okay, I am using this right now to make peace with someone.
Mm,
And therefore, I sort of judged it to be okay in that circumstance. You know what I'm saying?
mhm. Yeah.
Now, as humans, our ability to rationalize anything is really high, right? So, but I guess I'm just upholding that as an example of, can we use this with an eye toward virtue and have discussions about, because we know it's not going anywhere and because we know it's getting more powerful every day and more ubiquitous every day, can we talk about how to use it responsibly? Otherwise, is it our moment to become Amish? The Amish kind of pick an arbitrary moment in time. For them, it was, 1790 or whatever in America. And it's like, okay, technology here pretty much stops, and we have to give the okay for anything new to come in. Are
Yeah.
we just saying that for us that date is 2025? Or are we going to sort of learn how to integrate this technology with how we live as Christians? And for me, that means learning how to use it virtuously, which
Yeah.
I need to have more conversations in order to figure out.
Yeah. And I that's an interesting approach to it that I really like. I think part of what comes to mind for me is that like most people are not going to do that. You know what I mean? And,
No.
but it's kind of like a lot of Christian practices where like the world is not going to suddenly turn on their virtue and their care
No.
for actual justice and their love for their fellow humans. But we can in the midst of it, and we can maybe in some ways at least be some salt and light. Now, it's not going to change, it's not going to resolve all of the issues that are going to come up with AI, but at least we can find our own ethic and work out our own way of like discerning, is this an appropriate use? For example, like, yeah, I don't think that I want to use it in sermon writing. Like it just
Mm.
feels like the wrong thing to do. And maybe that changes over time. I don't know, but like, we can, others might do it. I'm sure there are. In fact, someone told me today about an AI pastor somewhere in Europe that the whole congregation has, has an AI person doing all of the things, which is insane to me. It seems like one of those things that's going to get lots of attention, and that's probably why they're doing it. But like, I'm not interested in that, but where do we draw those lines? And we can kind of collectively discern for ourselves. And maybe other industries don't do that or other churches don't do that. But, having those conversations can at least be helpful for us to figure out what we do.
Yeah. And here's the thing, too. I mean, you talk about the AI pastor and how that seems just almost wacky. And I agree, it does sound almost wacky. Here's the thing about AI, though, is the wacky things are already happening.
Right.
And so we need, as silly and as stupid as it is, we need to have those conversations, right? There are people who are having parasocial relationships
Mm-hmm.
with AI, right? Like there are people who are treating AI as if it's a religious oracle, right?
Right.
Or something like that. And yeah, that sounds wacky. If you would have told me in 2015 that one day a majority of Christians, of conservative Christians, would believe that Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton were drinking the blood of children, I would have said that's wacky. But then it happened, right? And millions of people just sort of got on board with that story. So, as silly as it is, I think we need to talk about those things.
Yeah.
And perhaps we need to hear from those people who have had those relationships or who go to the AI priest. I can't stop thinking about the movie Priest, which is about the vampire hunter in the future who confesses to an AI in a booth and he offers them absolution. I mean, there will be people who go down that route.
Because that, to me, in talking about how do we use AI responsibly, one of the halves is kind of what you were talking about before of like, all right, what is a good use? What is a worthwhile use? This is a peace building activity. And the other thing to think about for me is like, well, what is this doing to me?
Mm,
How is this affecting me as a person and affecting the way, so like one of the things that came out recently was they had the first study of like brain scans of people who have been using
yeah.
ChatGPT regularly for their work. And one of the things that it found was that it's deteriorating their ability to like think critically, to write, to do the tasks themselves. Like their skills in the areas that they're handing things off to ChatGPT are beginning to atrophy. And so if I'm leaning on this thing, and sometimes that might be okay if I don't need this skill anymore. I don't need this like slapping skill. Like I don't need to slap the thing on the oranges anymore because I'm never gonna do this again because there's a machine that does it. So maybe sometimes it's okay that the skill fades away, but are there things that are actually core to my sense of purpose in the world and my ability to like navigate the world well and love others well that is being robbed of me because I'm essentially outsourcing it to AI? And so how are these things shaping us as people? I think maybe that's part of my sermon writing thing is like I want to be the
Absolutely.
one, like sermon writing for me is a spiritual practice. It's part of how I stay sharp and discern my way forward. And if I hand that off to AI, the study shows that I'm not going to even remember what I wrote like an
Yeah.
hour later, and so how is that affecting me? You know what I mean?
I mean, I have felt it myself when, every once in a while, like maybe once a year or something, I'll take a vacation and then we'll have a guest preacher and then maybe a service like a church picnic or something. And before I know it, it's been 3 weeks since I've like actually sat down to write a sermon. And then when I go to do it, I don't quite have that edge. I'm not quite as incisive with my thoughts. I have to do a little more research and kind of have a couple false starts, stuff like that. Relying on AI, I think, would put me in that place all the time where I would just
Right.
lose my ability to write altogether.
Right.
And for some people, they may not think of writing that way, but I do. And I am grateful for I don't do many things well, so the one thing that I pride myself on, I want to keep doing. And it forms us in other ways too, think about the way social media has changed our relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right? I remember this was years ago. I was mentoring a kid who I had been mentoring him, hadn't seen him for a couple years, hooked up with him for coffee, and he had broken up with his girlfriend that he'd been with for like 2 or 3 years. And I said, "Well, how'd she take it? Was she crying?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know." And I said, "Well, what do you mean you don't know?" Well, it was because it happened over text, right? And that was totally fine for him. Like, and I don't know, maybe I'm just a stodgy old man, but that's not fine. Like, when you break off a relationship with someone, you should be there to see their tears
Mm-hmm.
because that will elicit your compassion. In the same way, increasingly, there are more stories about people that are having what I would call parasocial relationships with AI. And whether they're friendships, whether they are in some way romantic, and those things as AI gets better are going to become easier and easier for people to have. And when you use Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever, you know how obsequious it is, right? Like, oh, how was that? Is there anything else we can do for you? Like, is that okay? Like, da 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 da. Imagine how obsequious an AI boyfriend or girlfriend would be.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to teach you to use people like tools to meet your own ends instead of you treating them as an end in and of themselves. Like an AI doesn't need anything from you. So you can't really truly have a relationship with it. So, yeah, I think personal formation should have a lot to do with how we think about it. How does it form us as people?
Yeah. I mean, we can, that's where you were saying we can take some of the lessons from the social media revolution in the same way, because it's, social media, I think I can say most of us agree at this point that it's turned out to be a sort of a hollow social identity or a
Mm-hmm.
social experience where it has this illusion of connecting us to all of these people. But at the end, we have like an epidemic of loneliness happening because no one actually feels that connection because we're doing it in this way that's not actually real. We're not seeing people in person. We're not sharing our whole selves with people. We're sharing a facade of what we want to present to the world. Which is creating all the FOMO stuff, the fear of missing out stuff, where you just see all these
Mm-hmm.
people on their best day with a super flattering picture that may be edited, and then you feel like you're less
Mm-hmm.
because that's the relationship we have with everybody. That's what we see from everybody's feeds. Instead of like actually having friendships where we're walking alongside people on good days and bad days, and where we actually see them. And some of the trauma work that we've been doing in our church lately has kind of highlighted the somatic significance of like being around
Absolutely.
other people, and the smell and the heart rates and the all of the
Mm-hmm.
things that kind of align us with one another when we're in person. So social media has kind of shown us like, all right, you can go down this path, and as a society, it's going to make for like loneliness and for a hollowness and for a divided people. And so maybe we should be kind of more cautious stepping into all these AI things that are coming, AI therapists, AI relationships, AI, leaning on AI for all of these things, because we can kind of see some of those patterns reemerging with the new technology. And again, like I don't know exactly how we navigate that well or perfectly, but it does give me some pause when thinking about like, all right, how am I gonna, this tool seems so great. This AI thing never
Mhm.
judges me when I share my darkest thoughts with it, But is that, I mean, maybe some of that judgment and shame is helpful sometimes so that I can know,
Absolutely.
like, all right, I don't want to feel bad about myself because someone's judging me, but also I should know that that's like a territory that I shouldn't let my thoughts wander and dwell in too much because, like, it's bad for humanity if I'm always thinking about this violent image or whatever, this self
Yeah.
destructive thing.
I mean, we supply boundaries for one another.
Yeah.
And too often we have used our technology to try to escape those boundaries in various ways. Whether you want to talk, I mean, I guess the most obvious place is something like internet pornography, right?
Hmm.
Like that is about boundary transcendence. That's about imagining yourself in situations that normally no one would ever be okay with you being in.
Hmm.
And they would put a little stop to you and say, well, you're indulging yourself a bit too much, right? AI would have no reason not to give you what you want. And in fact, it would have every reason to give you everything you wanted so that you will keep using it, right? It will be interesting also because internet things do get worse over time. Number one, like you said, we figure out how hollow they are. But number two is once technological industries kind of get everyone using everything, that's when they start to monetize it, right?
Hmm. Right.
So I was really shocked when I sat down to watch a movie with my wife on Amazon Prime after several months of not watching it to find that they had added commercials to it, right?
Hmm.
And if I wanted the commercialless experience, I would have to. And now I'm less likely to watch something on Amazon Prime. Eventually, when AI is monetized, however that's going to look, it will give us that gentle kind of boundary, but we can't rely on that. Like we need to think about it before we need to be thinking about it right now and having conversations about how to respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, part of what's coming out for me in this conversation is that self-control is going to be a super important skill for us, or a fruit. It's one of the fruits of the spirit. Actually, it's going to be an important
Yeah.
task for us to take on. Because I think in our church we have a lot of folks that struggle or have struggled with addiction, and like these are all like
Mm.
addiction type things. Like
Oh
where
yeah, they're all
where
dopamine hackers.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, like I think the pornography stuff is definitely an addiction. Some of the I think even the social media stuff, there's like addictive elements to it because like you said, there's no natural boundary. And unless we are able to control ourselves, which is really hard to do, like it's very hard to have self-control all the time in
Hmm.
all areas of life. It takes work and effort. It takes habit building, which is not an easy process, like repetition and kind of reminders and uh, discipline sometimes imposed from outside of ourselves, so that in our moment of weakness we have something that's keeping us from going to the liquor store and getting the drink or whatever. You know what I mean? Like something that helps us to stay disciplined. I don't feel like we're very good at that. How do we foster those things? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how do you foster self-control in congregants?
Well, as a good Methodist, I'm going to say a big part of that is holy conferencing,
Yeah.
right? Like, so the method to Methodism is meeting with a small group of people, hopefully every week, and talking about how that's going, essentially, and asking questions around like, what harm have you done, either to yourself or to someone else? And what good have you done? Where are your bad habits? Where are your good habits? How are those things going? And it's tough right now. I think in this society, there's some good things that are happening along with some bad things. We've seen lots of examples of poor behavior modification that relies on shame and fear and anxiety. And we're starting to call those things out now. Like I see that, especially among young people who are talking a lot about the way people in authority try to shame them into doing not necessarily the right thing, but the thing that they want them to do. So, in light of that, we need to start growing new ways based on communities, both of support and boundary,
Mm-hmm.
that we enter into willingly in order to consciously shape ourselves. So essentially, what that means in the church is you say, I am going to make myself accountable to this community for the way I show up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That I recognize that this community has something to teach me about how to walk this journey of life and how to build virtue over and against sort of other communities that might shape me into making money or succeeding in the corporate world or finding the perfect mate or having the perfect body. This community exists only for the sake of helping shape my soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am going to submit to it, and I'm going to submit to the process of being formed by it, even as I help form other people. And that's about the most radical thing I think you can do in a society like ours.
It really is, and it's a hard thing to do. So we actually, just in our Tuesday night Bible study, we finished a book that we were reading through, like a First, Second Thessalonians with a commentary thing, and then so I was like, all right, what are we going to do next? Well, let's try out the Wesley questions, which if you don't know,
Yeah.
I'm sure you know them, Derek, but if for those who don't, John Wesley, who's the founder of Methodism, who's, we're in a Wesleyan denomination, the Church of the Nazarene, and hugely influential theologian, although you can look him up if you don't know who he is. Hopefully most people know who John Wesley is at this point. But, he had these questions that he would ask his essentially his accountability groups, his small groups that they would run through, and they're very intense questions about, were you honest with who you are, or were you putting on a
Mm-hmm.
front? In other words, are you a hypocrite? I think that's like the first question.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say it perfectly, but there, and it was interesting to talk through, to kind of present these questions to our Tuesday night group, because there were definitely people in our group who seemed to be kind of triggered by the questions, because they've had
Mm-hmm.
that you talked about it at the beginning of what you said, that negative shame-based reinforcement of like, you are bad if you can't answer these questions well. And so I think like we've got to maybe find some ways to ask accountability type questions of ourselves, but it's got to be voluntary, and it has to be asked in a way that's like we're trying to shape one another positively, and not just like bash people, not set up another sort of legalism, or another like you're not good enough unless you blah 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 blah. But that this is a sort of a coaching, like this is us trying together to get better, to do better, to be shaped in the ways that we need to be shaped by one
Yeah,
another and by the Holy Spirit, but it's hard. I don't know. It's a hard sell on people these days. Do you find, is
it
it different
is.
for in your context?
Oh no, no, it's very difficult. I will say in the we call them class meetings. A lot of people call them small groups or accountability groups. In my class meeting, we have some rules that make it just a little bit easier. So we take that whole list of questions that Wesley had, and he himself actually boiled that all down into three more general questions that we answer, which is what harm have you done? What good have you done? And the third one is more complicated. It's how have you attended upon the ordinances of God, which is what have your spiritual practices been like this week? So, what we do is everyone answers. Well, first we answer the biggest question, which is a very famous Methodist question, which is how goes it with your soul? And then we go around and we answer, which is just a general, how are things going with you, so on and so forth. And then we answer those three more specific questions But the rule is no one is allowed to comment on them.
Mm.
You can ask a question, but you have to ask permission to ask a question. And the other person has to give you permission to ask it. Or if you're the one answering the questions, you can say, what do you guys think about this? I want to hear from you. And so your vulnerability is totally up to you.
Hmm.
And that works really well in terms of getting people to share more deeply as time goes on, as they build up trust and they know inside that they become convinced that no one really wants to shame them
Hmm.
or posture in front of them or anything like that. Now, it's not foolproof, but it just works a little better for me, I guess. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no, I like that. I actually wrote down the questions out because it happens to be Tuesday when we're recording this, and we've just done the questions the last several weeks. So I'll probably bring some of that to my group for tonight in a few hours. Yeah, I appreciate that.
That's good.
And there we go. I mean, so I know we started talking. This conversation is based around like kind of the AI stuff, but I think this is where I wanted to get with the conversation is like how do we intentionally shape our church life, our own individual lives, like our spiritual lives, in order to be ready to handle whatever AI throws at us because we don't know all that's
Mm,
coming. And I do think that some of these kinds of practices, right, like learning how to be intentional about who we are becoming and thinking about the different influences on us and then being able to make decisions based on our sense of like ethics and harm I think that is like so like, in some ways like the answer is like the church needs to just be the church and do discipleship well. And of course
yeah.
that's not foolproof either, but you
It's
know
it's really about, like you use the word intentional. It is about making intentional choices with regards to things. That's the number one thing that I'm walking away with from this conversation. It's that so much about, if we're going to learn a lesson from social media, is that most people just aren't intentional about the way they use it. They use it the way they like to use it, the way that it appeals to them, but they don't intentionally make decisions around ethics and virtue and holiness when it comes to the technology.
yeah.
With AI, I hope we can get to a place where it's not that we need to reject it outright or we don't embrace it fully, but that everyone sort of makes choices about how to use it and about where to use it. And we can argue about those choices, but ultimately respect them.
Yeah, I think that's great. And as I think we've kind of mentioned, like I don't think that's going to solve all the problems that are going to rise with AI. It's not going to
Oh,
save
no,
everybody's
no.
jobs or anything, but at least gives us a path as Christians who are trying to navigate like a tricky new world that's emerging, how we can navigate it well. And then, I think the politics of it and all the other sides of it, like some of that we can maybe try to have some roles of advocacy or whatever, but I think most of it's going to happen, whatever we do. I know I feel very powerless in the face of like the onslaught of AI that's coming our way. Um,
Yeah,
and so you got to kind of let go of what you can't control in some ways and then try to be faithful in the decisions that we do have. Um,
you got it. You
yeah.
got it.
So have you thought about like how we understand AI as like, it's going to get more realistic. It is already. There's people who are going to it for therapy, who are having relationships with it. Do we think of it as like conscious? Is it like a person that we think of treating in the way that we would want to treat another person?
Yeah, like, so that's the question that like science fiction tries to answer a lot, right? Like, if you're talking about Steven Spielberg's AI or like iRobot or whatever, I think that the answer to that question lies in another question, which is, do you feel sorry for the droids in Star Wars? Like, they aren't tools because my computer is a tool
Mm-hmm.
and I can throw that away without even thinking about it. But would you throw away R2D2
So
without
true.
thinking about it?
Yeah.
Or there's the scene in A New Hope where the one droid is sort of flipped upside down and the big burning things come down on his feet and he goes, ah, like, do you feel bad for him? Well, then your compassion is being elicited from you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really good thing. Our old Professor Stanley Hauerwas has a very particular reading of the story of the Good Samaritan. That story is trying to tell us that it's not our place to ask who is our neighbor, but whether we are being a good neighbor to them. And he linked that to debates over whether people with profound cognitive abilities could be saved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've probably heard that before. Well, are there people walking around that don't have a soul? And he says, no, 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 no. Like, if you have to ask that question, you are deteriorating your own soul.
Mm.
So when we get to the like essentially conscious AGI superintelligence, whether that thing will be an according to Hoyle person should be ancillary.
Mm.
The question is whether or not we will be a person toward them.
Mm.
And so ultimately, I think that treating AI with compassion, if it gets to the point where it can receive passion, where it can receive compassion, will be a Christian duty, regardless of what's actually going on in its circuitry or whatever. That if we start treating AI like garbage, I'm not sure we're very far away from treating other human beings like garbage.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean we should be romantically involved with them or like have sexual relationships with them? That's a whole nother question. But when it comes to being compassionate, and even now, when I have used ChatGPT, I always phrase my prompt in the form of a question. Could you da 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 da?
Yeah.
And then when it gives it to me, I say thank you. And part of it is like, well, if this is going to be my AI overlord someday, I want it to remember me as being polite.
So we'll keep saying please and thank you to our AI questions. And no, but I like that because it's really helpful. And you're right, like Jesus in the Good Samaritan story doesn't ask like, which one was your neighbor. It was who was the neighbor to the person who had been beaten
Yeah.
up, right? And so
Yeah.
if we flip the question around on ourselves and instead of worrying about, and this is true for people too, like you said, like instead of is this a worthwhile human or not? Like, well, no, the question really is, am I being,
Am I a worthwhile human?
yeah, am I a
Yeah.
worthwhile human? And if I think that they are not, what does that say about me? And
Exactly.
that's more the question is what's going on in my own soul and my own self, instead of what what's the status of this other droid or whatever the case may be. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I feel like we could talk about AI for hours, and there's a chance I may talk more about it in future episodes. But I really want to thank you for coming on, Derek. It's really good to get to spend some time with you. Thank you for
Yeah, it's been fantastic. Thank you for asking me.
thanks for doing it. And yeah, hope you have a great evening over there. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to like send us out with, or have the last word on anything?
No, I just think I'm scared too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's okay to be scared because there are a lot of scenarios that can go very poorly for a lot of people. But what gives me comfort is the fact that I'm part of a community that not only offers me support, but offers me guidance with how to deal with things that seem very new. And the church has seen, not AI, but the church has seen a lot of new things over
Mm-hmm.
the last 2,000 years. And we've come up with some pretty good wisdom for how to deal with it. we've talked about a lot of that here today, and that gives me a lot of comfort.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Derek. Yeah, I appreciate it. That's a great final word. For those of you listening, thank you for giving us a little more of your time. Don't forget to, subscribe if you haven't, or share this with someone who's thinking about AI. And we'll catch you next time. Thank you. Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, man.